In the icy silence of the Carpathian Mountains, where the winds sing through the pines like morning choirs, stands the crumbling ruin of Lactus Castle. Its stones, veined with moss and shadow, once held a secret so vile that even the ravens avoid its towers. Here, behind those damp walls and splintered gates, lived a woman whose name still bleeds through the Countess of Blood. Her birth was heralded not with celebration but with whispers, for her lineage bore both privilege and poison. She could recite Latin before most children could read their native tongue, seizures that left her stiff and frothing at the mouth. But there was something else during these episodes. She would whisper unintelligible words, fragments of ancient tongues no one could recognize. When she awoke, she claimed no memory. Her husband, a brutal man known as the Black Knight of Hungary, was often away at war, leaving Elizabeth alone with her books, her thoughts, and her servants. It was during these absences that she began her true education, not in languages or courtly manners, but in pain. But her nurse, once said she saw the child levitating in her sleep, her body limp as a puppet, yet floating inches above the bed. Enraged, the Countess struck the girl so hard across the face that blood spattered across her hand. And in that moment, in that glistening red trail, Elizabeth saw something impossible. Her skin where the blood had touched seemed smoother. Elizabeth became obsessed with mirrors. With the passage of time, she would stare for hours, measuring the wrinkles beneath her eyes, the sag of her cheeks. They said she smiled down at them. She experimented at first with blood smears, then with small cuts, then with baths. The castle maids began to vanish. Excuses were made. Illness, elopement, theft. But the truth lay in the soot-filled chimneys and the cold, red basins beneath the floorboards. Younger, as if the years had recoiled from her. Her beauty was striking. High Slavic cheekbones, raven black hair, and eyes like polished emotionless and unblinking. The wedding was lavish, obscenely so. Gold leaf crusted the church walls. White doves were released into a gray sky, but many of them never flew, struck dead by a sudden storm. Some said it was an omen, but there was a stillness in her, a quiet, unnerving calm that made servants lower their eyes and priests cross themselves as she passed. They were one of the most powerful families in Hungary, their bloodlines tangled with warlords, princes, and madmen. On her father's side, warriors who drank from skulls. On her mother's, scholars who dabbled in alchemy. And persistent rumors of a black book bound in flesh. She was not born a monster. Elizabeth came into the world in 1560, a winter child under a dark Hungarian sky. From an early age, Elizabeth showed signs of brilliance. They said that as a child, she suffered from fits. At the age of 11, Elizabeth was betrothed to Count Ferenc, a union of noble blood and military power. Elizabeth moved to her husband's estate, Savara Castle, where she became the Lady of Hundreds. One night, when the frost cracked the windows like brittle bone, a young maid spilled a drop of perfume onto Elizabeth's sleeve. This was the first drop. From then on, her punishments grew harsher. Girls were beaten, burned, and bled. And yet, no one dared accuse her, because she was still beautiful. Because the peasants feared her more than they pitied their missing daughters. And because in the night, when the wind cried like a dying woman, the villagers swore they saw something move across the castle tower, a pale shape, naked and wet, her body steaming in the moonlight. And in that smile, there was no humanity, only hunger. They called it the inner garden, not because flowers grew. There nothing bloomed in that courtyard. No matter how many seasons passed, the soil was black, packed with ashes and bone splinters. Elizabeth ordered hedges carved into strange, angular shapes and said they resembled human anatomy, distorted and elegant. In the center stood a single marble fountain. No water ever flowed through it, only blood. By now, the castle had become a tomb that breathed. Elizabeth had refined her rituals. No longer did she rely on accidents or raid. The act of bathing in blood had become art. The maids were chosen carefully. Virgins always, preferably blonde, young, and naive. They were told they'd serve a noble lady, perhaps even rise to the position of companion. The condition of the blood, the hue scarlet, crimson, burgundy, the warmth, the time between death and decay. Some entries were marked with a simple cross, others with a note. Too thin, not fresh, satisfactory. She asked him under the guise of medical curiosity whether the blood of the young could reverse aging. The man, nervous, perhaps intrigued, gave an evasive answer. The body, he said, responds to vitality. Youth may nourish age, in theory. Too many young girls from good families had vanished after being sent to the Countess. His presence, cruel as it was, had served as a barrier between Elizabeth and the outer world. With him gone, she was untethered, more reckless, more frequent in her pursuits. Rumors, fragile as spider silk, reached Vienna, and yet, nothing was done. They scoured the countryside for victims, promised coin to starving families, kidnapped orphans from marketplaces. One of them, Dorothea Shantes, was said to have a taste for cruelty that surpassed even her mistress. She devised instruments, needles, claws, iron cages too small to stand or sit in. The castle basement was no longer a place of wine and storage, but of screaming metal and silence that followed. A figure beyond time, beyond decay, a statue carved from the suffering of others. Many went willingly, walking into the dark of Lactus Castle with hopeful hearts and none returned. A shepherd heard it, then another. The rumors were no longer whispers. They were shouts, chants, prayers. She kept a ledger. She stared into them and saw, not youth, but hollowness. Her eyes, once like obsidian, now seemed too wide, too still. Her skin, for all its ritual, had grown thin, translucent, almost as if it could no longer contain what lay beneath. Not of names, but of results, killed more recklessly. One day, she tore open a girl's throat with her bare hand. Her confidants looked not in admiration, but fear. But beauty is never satisfied. One winter, when the snow fell thick enough to silence the wolves, Elizabeth invited a physician from Vienna. He was found days later, wandering the woods barefoot, speaking to trees as if they were kings. Some say Elizabeth had drugged him. Others believed the castle itself had whispered into his mind. Visiting lords found themselves mesmerized, unable to meet her eyes without blushing. She danced like a woman half her age, and always she laughed softly, never too loud, never too long. Her smile lingered just enough to suggest she knew something no one else did. By this time, whispers had begun to circulate not from peasants, but from within the noble courts, because Elizabeth was still beautiful. She threw lavish feasts. Her skin was alabaster, unblemished. Her hair gleamed like ink in candlelight, but the walls were closing in. Her husband, Count Ferenc, had died some years earlier to manage the growing need for fresh blood. She appointed for confidence 3 women, and 1 man, yet Elizabeth believed she was doing God's work. In one letter preserved in fragments she wrote, "To preserve beauty is to preserve the divine. Do not lambs bleed for our salvation? Then why not girls? For mine." She had begun to see herself as more than human, but decay always comes. One night, a noble girl sent by her father to be educated at court screamed so loudly before dying that her voice cracked the silence of the hills. The countess did not panic. She laughed. "Let him come," she said. "Let him bring their torches. I am beyond their reach." But in the dark corridors of her castle, the mirrors began to betray her. She bathed more frequently. For the first time, they saw her not as noble, but as man. It began not with thunder, but with silence. One morning, the birds did not sing above Lactus Castle. The wind stood still. The cookmaid, who rose before dawn each day to fetch water, stepped out and found the well frozen not just with ice, but with something darker clinging to its rim. A red stain, like rust, like memory. The villagers below had stopped looking up at the castle altogether. For years, they had learned to pretend. When daughters disappeared, they said wolves took them. When the river turned red, they said it was iron from the mountain. His name was Giergy, the Palatine of Hungarian, old friend of Elizabeth's late husband. He came, officially, to inspect her holding, but he was not shown the cellars. He was not shown the towel room, and at night he heard things, a whimper behind the wall, the shuffle of chains. Once, he saw a smear on the stone floor, wiped hurriedly, imperfectly. He said nothing. He only nodded and kept his observations quiet. Unofficially, he came to hunt the truth. But now, the pretending had worn thin. Eyes turned to Vienna, and Vienna listened. The castle was adorned with silken candles. The hearths were lit. The wine was rich. She wore black velvet, her hair pinned high with pearls. What is agreed upon is this: the girl lived, and Elizabeth did not deny a single thing. Elizabeth walked behind her, barefoot, holding a thin dagger. She was humming. In the chamber lit by candlelight, She motioned to a basin and spoke a single word. The garden, when dug, revealed bone small, brittle, and 2-minute account. Her voice was sweet, her laughter practiced, but behind her eyes something trembled. In 1610, a man arrived. He rode not with soldiers, but with scribes and parchment. Elizabeth welcomed him with the charm of an aging empress. Stayed for 3 days. Dorothea, the cruelest, cursed the church. As she was dragged through the mud, the others wept. One slit her own throat with a broken button before sunrise. He was shown the great hall, the libraries, the garden. A single slit in the wall allowed food to pass. No mirror, no candle, only stone, damp and cold. Her name was never spoken in court again. The family paid large sums to cleanse the scandal. Officially, she had been retired from public life. Her eyes still burning with something that could not die. On the third night, he did not sleep. Instead, he hid in the shadows with his men, waiting. What they saw broke him. A girl no older than 30 dragged by her wrists down the corridor, her mouth stuffed with linen. Phil stormed the room before the blade could fall. What happened next is written in many conflicting ways. Some say Elizabeth screamed. Others say she stood still, as if unsurprised. They found the ledger in her chambers. Not one of finance, but flesh. Inside the count, 612 names. A number struck through, replaced with 600. They found the iron cage, the table lined with glass jars of coagulated blood, instruments no one could name. And still, the Countess did not beg. She said only, "What is youth, if not meant to be given?" They were not taken. They were offered. Her co-conspirators were taken away in chains. But Elizabeth was too noble to hang. Instead, she was sentenced to a prison of silence. They bricked her into a tower room within Lactus itself. Yet the tower remained. Villagers said she never screamed. Not once. That in the dead of night, a low song would echo from the stone soft, beautiful, and terribly sad. But others claimed they saw her face from the slit in the wall, pale as marble. They say, she whispered to no one, "I am still beautiful." The blood remembers. 3 years passed. Then, one morning, the guards found her unmoving, her hands folded neatly, her mouth open, as if mid-sentence. She died as she lived in silence, in shadow, but she did not disappear. Not truly. They buried her in secret. No monument, no name carved in stone, just a patch of frozen earth in the village cemetery near Lactus. The church records list the date, August 21st, 1614. But no priest rang the bell. No mourner wept. The children cried without reason, and dogs howled at empty corners. So they took her bones and scattered them among the trees, hoping the forest would forget what history could not. Only the gravedigger and 2 soldiers watched as her body, wrapped in linen, was lowered like a shameful relic into the dirt. And yet, the ground did not hold her. A week later, the villagers unearthed the grave and hurled the remains into the forest. They said the earth had begun to rot, that crops wilted near the cemetery. But the forest remembers. Time passed, generations came and went. Empires rose and crumbled. Lactus Castle fell into ruin. Ivy swallowed its walls. The tower collapsed. Stones were stolen by peasants for homes, unaware of the screams sealed within them. The castle was declared haunted. No one lingered there after sunset. Horses refused to pass the main gate. And yet, every year, some traveler drawn by legend or menace would come. And some never left. That if you dig deep enough beneath the ruined fountain, you will find the shape of a girl, curled beneath the roots. That the real Countess escaped, aided by occult knowledge whispered from a black book passed down through her bloodline. That she roams still beneath another name, another face hidden among the powerful, the beautiful, the untouched by age, her skin waxen, her mouth slightly parted, as if whispering a prayer or a curse. Women in high circles with skin to smooth, eyes to cold. Celebrities who disappear for months, then return somehow, brighter, tighter, glowing with unnatural youth. Beauty regimens that cost more than houses. Salons that promise renewal. Blood facials, stem cell bath. In 1725, a Jesuit priest was sent to exorcise the grounds. He told his men he was looking for occult artifacts. His men returned without him, pale and wordless. He vanished. All they found was his journal, abandoned near the garden. The last page read, "A necklace, identical to the one she wore, resurfaced in an auction in Berlin in 1992. It was purchased anonymously. never seen again. I saw her in the mirror, not aged, not gone. Days later, his horse returned, riderless, soaked in blood. In 1893, a young aristocrat visiting from Vienna disappeared during a storm. In 1944, a Nazi officer stationed near Lactus led an unauthorized search of the ruins, and still, the blood returns. Some say it's in the soil, that it rises with the mist each spring. But there is another story, one that is never written, only told, that Elizabeth never died. That what they buried was not her, but a servant burned and dressed in her clothes. It sounds absurd, but have you not seen them? Those who never seem to grow old. We say it's science, but it began with her. Look closely, and you'll find Ecos paintings that resemble her face in strange museums. In the Tower Room, sealed again in 2003, not by the government, not by historians, by men in suits who spoke no words, left no papers, and left behind the scent of old stone and iron. They say a mirror was found there, covered in cloth, and when uncovered just for a moment, did not reflect the faces of those standing before it. Only hers. Elizabeth, the Countess, the Blood Maiden. Maybe she was a monster. Maybe she was a myth. But one truth clings like fog to the hills of Lactus. Beauty is not eternal, but obsession is, and some obsessions drink deeper than time. So tonight, if you dream of a pale woman with dark eyes, and you feel a hand on your cheek cold, soft, ancient, do not answer her. Do not open your eyes. And whatever you do not bleed.